at our core, while forecasting is an element of what we do, it's this kind of sense and response system of you're seeing what's happening in real time. It's never according to plan. Nothing ever works according to plan. It's just a question of how far off you are. And we're going to tell you that sooner than you'd otherwise know.
Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. The CPG industry faces increasingly unpredictable demand patterns, complex inventory management challenges, and heightened expectations for agility and responsiveness. Traditional forecasting tools often fall short, leaving companies vulnerable to costly stockouts or excess inventory. In today's discussion, Joel Beal, CEO and co-founder of Alloy AI, and I are going to explore how their tool leverages advanced AI and real-time analytics to tackle these pressing issues, optimizing demand planning and inventory decisions for a rapidly changing market. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you, Ellen. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you here. We are going to have a great conversation, I can tell, because this is such a huge topic right now. Planning is the buzzword on everyone's mind. But before we get started, let's do our ice break really quick. And the question that you chose for today is, what book are you currently reading?
Well, I'm going to give two answers because I actually just finished a book and I'm starting a new one. So I just finished Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, which is a tough one. It's a pretty sad book. So I needed a little bit of lighter fare after that, and I actually started reading Jack Reacher of all things. So I'd seen the show. I mean, I've seen the movie, I guess, years ago. Tom Cruise, who's not a very good Jack Reacher. He's a little too short. Jack Reacher is 6'5". I'm not sure Tom Cruise is 5'8". But yeah, I decided I needed something a little more lighthearted. So I actually just finished the first book and I was like, I'll read the second because you can get through them in a couple days. So.
I am also a fan of novels, and I belong to a couple different book clubs and I love to read, but there is one series and I reread the series every year, and it's the Outlander series.
Yep.
So made into the TV show. It's huge on multiple platforms now. For a while, it was only on the one streaming platform. And I am on book number 4 for this year. And each of the books is about 1,000 pages. I mean, they're heavy duty novels. And I remember the first time I was reading through it, my brother-in-law saw it on my coffee table. And he was like, "Are you actually reading that book?" I was like, "Yeah, it's one of like 8. He was like, "Why would you do that to yourself?" I thought, what kind of a question is that? Readers read books, and sometimes we read the bigger ones.
Yeah. And so are you reading them all in a row, or do you break it up with other? Okay.
So I will, I don't read just one book at a time most of the time. So this is
You're usually reading 2, 3. I mean, I know there's people who do
3. Yeah. I will read 2 to 3 at a time. In fact, the other book that I'm reading right now is a book about video marketing for marketers is the name of the book. And because I'm a marketer, and so I've always got something that I'm reading for like personal or professional development. I've always got something that I'm reading just because I want to read something and I need something to calm my brain down at night. And then I'm usually reading something that someone suggested to me or I got at the library. I mean, on my vacation a couple of weeks ago, I read 7 books in 5 days.
I can appreciate that. I grew up in a family. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. And we did not have a TV growing up. That was a decision my parents made, which was very unusual. I think everyone was confused. But as a result, we're all big readers, and that's all I've been doing most of my life. I do get distracted now more by TV shows than I probably used to. But instilled a love of reading. And my brother ended up being involved with one of the largest online used booksellers in the world. So he ended up running that business called Thrift Books.
Very cool. I have used Thrift Books.
Probably used them. Yep. So, so reading is something I can tell you deeply care about and something I love to do. I don't read a lot of fiction though. I find I need it to just decompress at the end of the day. So I generally, again, switch between more serious, sad fare, as my wife will often say. And then I'll pick something that's kind of a throwaway, but just fun.
I love the throwaway fun ones. They're just nice. Lighthearted, something to do. All right. Well, books is not what we're talking about today. We are talking about the CPG industry and stock and planning. And whew, this is a big one. This is a big topic. It's the novel. This is the Mishnah of
That's right.
situations right now. So let's talk a little bit, starting at the beginning. What was the original inspiration behind Alloy AI? What were you trying to solve? What was the big problem in the marketplace that really drew you into this particular venture?
Yeah, I'll not bore you with the full story, but when I dropped out of a PhD program in economics and I started working in software, and I worked for a company that primarily did analytics for retailers. And so I got very experienced working with point of sale, inventory data, things of that nature, but all provided by the retailer so the retailer could optimize its own business. And we struggled to sell to CPGs because they didn't have the same data. So that was kind of my intro to the space. But I saw that, and we were working with some of the largest CPGs in the world, and they would wait, a month after the fact. They get some data from Nielsen, these syndicated data providers. It wasn't super granular. It's very expensive. So I just kind of filed that away, did some other things for a number of years in financial technology, but I always liked this space. And then as I started to talk to people I'd known from before, more on the CPG side, they started to say, actually there is data that's available. Retailers share a lot of data back with us. It's just too hard to work with because every retailer has their own mechanism for sharing it. So that's how I came about the problem. And I said, okay, I had no idea the data was even there. In many cases, it was free. But it turns out that every single retailer, they don't coordinate to make it easy for their suppliers. They all provide, a different solution. They provide different data. So really Alloy was born out of the frustration I heard from those companies. And there was something I heard over and over again is people would say, we're blind once we ship out product. We ship product out to our retail partners, and then we wait for the next week. And then we get more orders and we don't really know what's going on. We're talking to them, we'll anecdotally get data. And so that was really the problem that we set out to solve at the beginning is the data is there. It's just unwieldy. It's hard to use. I happen to have a lot of experience at that point, building out data platforms, being able to collect a lot of disparate data sets. And so I kind of took that experience and I started to apply it to the space.
Well, I mean, and as you point out, being a software engineer, there's a lot of analytics tools out there. There are tons on the market. What makes this one different from the other traditional tools that already exist?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is to understand while Alloy does a lot of analytics, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, at our core, we're really a data platform. Okay. And, most tools, the ones that most people are going to be familiar with, the Tableaus, the Lookers, the Clicks, the, tools like that, they really don't help you collect the data. They're good visualization. They're
Okay.
kind of a good analytics layer on top of it. And the problem that we saw is people couldn't even get the data to start doing the analytics. And so
Gotcha.
That's really where we start is we say, okay, brand, who do you sell through? What are your major sales channels? Which retailers, distributors, e-commerce platforms? We're going to go get that data for you. We're going to get the most granular data that's available in a way that a computer can do that a human might struggle with because you're pulling
it'll
every
take
single
forever.
SKU every single day. Exactly. Nobody wants to sit there and click that button. And that's how, by the way, these companies have been operating for decades. I mean, they have people manually downloading that data on Monday mornings. And so that is really where Alloy starts is we collect all this data, we normalize it. And so you can compare, and see how you're doing in Amazon, how you're doing in Kroger, how you're doing in Walmart, et cetera, and really understand your business holistically. So that's really where we differentiate. Our business model is such that we're fine. We play nice with all the other BI tools. If you want to use Tableau, we'll push the data in there and you can do a lot of things that you can't do in Alloy and that's great. But of course, because we have domain experience, we've also been able to build a lot of analytics and workflows that are very specific to this space. And we find that saves people a lot of time. And so they tend to like to use our analytics. But we're fine if they have another solution that works for them well too.
Sure. All right. So now we've got the data. It's all clean. It's all normalized, as you said, and we've got a ton of it. What is it? How does it forecast? How does it handle those sudden shifts in consumer behaviors, unexpected trends, viral trends? I know there are, you hear the stories about someone going on Shark Tank and all of a sudden, all of their inventory is gone because it's gotten its publicity. Those types of market disruptions, can it handle those volatile changes and shifts?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that I think is somewhat unique to CPG. I mean, there's a lot of other industries that tend to be a little more stable. When you're in consumer products, you're right. You can have a famous influencer goes on and posts about a beauty brand, and they're going to see a 20x spike in sales.
Sure.
I can't predict when that's going to happen. That would be amazing if I could. So the short answer is we can't predict the unexpected. And that's not what we try to do. And I don't think that's possible. If you look at how does forecasting work? Whether you're using more traditional statistical models, whether you're using kind of newer machine learning models, all of them are just taking historical data and you're fitting to that. And generally, as models have gotten more sophisticated, you can look at a lot more different factors. You can try to understand causality. You can say, okay, yes, if somebody posts online, this is what I think the impact's going to be, but I don't necessarily know when someone is going to post online. And so, what we do, of course, we're building those models. We have the same limitations as everybody does, and that we only have historical data, and none of us have a crystal ball about what's going to happen in the future. I don't know the weather next week, right?
Neither does the weatherman.
Exactly. Although, amazingly enough, weather forecasting has gotten so much better if you actually look at it over time. So sometimes you even have models that are inputs into other models, right? If weather is highly impactful, I sell ice cream or pizzas. Pizzas are highly dependent on weather. Then you're actually using a forecast for what you think the weather is going to be. That's an input into your forecast, your demand forecast, right? But I think how we approach this problem is we say one of the limiting factors is, again, what historical data you're putting in. How granular is it? Like, how much data do I have to feed into these models? And what's the frequency of it? And oftentimes, if we're talking about these consumer brands, they forecast, they have, they don't have super dense data sets. I mean, most of them forecast using what they're shipping out to the retailers. And again, those shipments maybe they're daily, maybe they're weekly, they're infrequent, they're in bulk. And we're bringing what is the actual consumption by you and I? How much are people actually buying day in, day out? And
versus how much is sitting in that retailer's backroom storeroom.
Right. We actually have that information too. We have the inventory level. But it's a much more granular, and it's usually down to the location. We can go to a specific store or fulfillment center or DC. And so you're getting a very rapid response of, hey, when, let's say, that social media post happens and I'm a beauty brand and I'm seeing that mascara shoot through the roof, we're going to see it instantly or as close to instantly as the data is possible. And we're often seeing that days or a week before kind of traditional planning systems will, because they're relying on again, often weekly data at its core.
Right.
So that's really how we differentiate is it's around how real time can we see those signals. So when things deviate, our models can adjust and they can say, whoa, why are we seeing this spike? Maybe I don't know why yet, but I'm seeing it. And so both your forecast is going to adjust for that, but we also, usually there's, if your sales are 20xing, you're going to be in crisis mode, trying to take advantage of that. There's going to be lots of things. You're going to be expediting shipments. You're going to be saying, hey, do I need to adjust production? You're going to be moving inventory around. And we give you, at our core, while forecasting is an element of what we do, it's this kind of, sense and response system of you're seeing what's happening in real time. It's never according to plan. Nothing ever works according to plan. It's just a question of how far off you are. And we're going to tell you that sooner than you'd otherwise know.
Okay. No, I loved your analogy with pizza, depending on the weather, because in my previous life, I was the restaurant manager for a pizza place. And sure enough, if it was raining that day, it didn't matter what the forecast said, we were going to sell out of pizzas. So you'd have to adjust for that on the fly, knowing that, whatever that historical data said doesn't matter anymore because this new piece of information is going to completely change the game. And so what I'm hearing is that this tool gives that information a lot faster so that that person, who knows what that means or who can at least give a more educated guess as to what impact that's going to have, can make those adjustments on the fly, redeploying inventory or ramping up production.
Right. That's exactly it. And to use that example, I love that you worked in pizza because, yes, I don't think most people understand how much rain impacts the sale of pizza. I worked with a pizza restaurant chain years ago. That's why I know the same thing. But, if you're managing the pizza joint, you see the rain clouds, I guess, come and it's like, okay, we're going to get slammed here, for dinner. Well, if you're supplying the pizza joint, right, you're not going to feel that impact until all of a sudden
they're out of
orders than you had. Yeah. Cause the inventory is running out, there's a bigger order. And so that's the difference. Again, the retailers see this and they can respond more quickly. Their suppliers are all more blind and they're just waiting for that lag. And that's why you have, the bullwhip effect in supply chain, is because that signal starts, and yet as you go further back in the supply chain, other people aren't aware that things have
changed. They haven't gotten it.
Yeah, exactly.
They haven't got the signal.
Time that information has propagated up the supply chain, well, it's back to being sunny and pizza demand's fallen and everyone's tired of eating pizza after the rainy week. And all of a sudden you have an excess of pizza supplies that are piling up the suppliers. So you can really think of, the starting point for everything we do is how do we propagate that demand signal more quickly up the supply chain so the suppliers can respond. And obviously that benefits the retailers, or in our analogy, the pizza, place, where they can say, okay, great, I'm going to have the right, when I order something, I'm going to be able to get it at the time and the place that I want it.
So it feels like as we're talking about this, chaos is just the new normal. I mean, volatility and that complexity, it's just expected now in retail, because retail has taken, it's a growing monster between e-commerce and brick and mortar stores, and all of the distribution that happens behind the scenes and trying to keep up with it. We've got the clearinghouses like Amazon or even Walmart.com. I mean, they sell things that you don't get in a Walmart store, so it's technically one of those types of sites. And so brands that are trying to sell into these retail companies and they're trying to get their products listed, how are they responding to a lot of that volatility and just not really knowing what's going to influence the market in retail?
Right. So, the volatility, supply chains have been in the news more the last couple of years, more on the supply disruptions, right? Everything that happened during COVID, the Suez Canal, in the last couple of months, it's been all about tariffs. So I think everyone's starting to be like, oh yeah, things don't just magically appear on the shelves. There's a very complicated system behind it. I think, when we look at our customers, the companies we work with, I think the huge shift that I see is there's so much more competition.
That's true.
There are just so many brands out there competing for your attention.
Mm-hmm.
And it's global in nature now. I actually saw a chart, you were mentioning Walmart.com, and it was showing the growth of Walmart's marketplace and how that's kind of taken off over the past 5 years. And there was a second chart and it showed what percentage of those sellers are American companies versus Chinese companies. And you were just seeing, when they'd started out, it was primarily, American suppliers who were providing that. And it still is a majority, but that, those lines are going to cross, it looks like. in the not too distant future. I think you've already seen that happen on Amazon's marketplace, which obviously is bigger and has been around longer. And so you're competing globally with, brands around the world that are, aggressively trying to undercut you on price. They're trying, different ways of marketing, getting access, all that. And so I think that's just the nature of a brand. It also means there's a bigger opportunity. There's more way to sell your product. You can also sell your product internationally more. The distribution is just easier than it used to be. What does that mean? So one of the things that we've seen, and obviously I have a biased view because I've been looking at this problem, from a certain way, is when I started Alloy, again, this pre-pandemic, often the feedback we would get is people would say, that is really cool. That's amazing that I could drill into an individual store and see a specific SKU and how much inventory is sitting there and how much I sold over the past week and my returns and all that. I wouldn't even know what to do with that data. And that was often the feeling. I'd be like, that is an overwhelming amount of detail. It is very neat. But that's not the way I operate. I mean, I operate on, I'm waiting for my orders that come in from retailer X on Tuesday
Mm-hmm.
and filling those. And I think the thing that we've seen is the pandemic accelerated this to an understanding that the world is more competitive now. There are both more disruptions on the supply chain that have been happening. And I think everyone assumes those are going to continue. Just kind of geopolitically, it's a little more complex than it used to be. But again, there's also just so much more competition on the demand side. And so the speed, again, going back to the earlier example we were using around a social media post, how fast can I respond to that?
Right.
Am I understanding that's happening within hours and doing what I can to, capture as much demand as possible? Or am I just on my back foot and waiting? And I think for decades, brands didn't have the ability, both technologically or the data wasn't there. And they also didn't have the mindset to be able to respond that fast. And I think that is the shift you're seeing is, again, we're just in a digital, always on world. And I think e-commerce, of course, massively accelerated this because you can see your sales live. You can see who's on your website. So that to me is really the shift that we're seeing right now.
I agree. Absolutely. The demand is obviously bigger with e-commerce just because of the convenience of it. But also, I mean, to your point, and this is me coming from a marketing perspective and not necessarily, a management perspective. But if I have the data to be able to show me on these e-commerce sites what times people are buying, what sites they're coming from, where that attribution is coming from, then that gives me the ability to then kind of control that, or at least have some sense of, okay, this is working, this is not. And, from a marketing perspective. So I think that granularity of the data is a huge thing for companies. I'm really surprised that, the marketers aren't banging on the CEO's door saying, you need to get this data so that we know what we're doing and we know when to sell and where to sell and when to push and when to pull back.
Yeah. And there's a huge divide. I mean, as you said, you're looking at website analytics, right? And you're trying to understand, attribute, okay, who's coming in from Google, who's coming. I mean, we were looking today on our site, how much traffic is starting to be driven through like ChatGPT. People do searches and, so a whole new channel, right? With a total different way of optimization. And so I think that has trained people for this just instant, this, expectation for instant understanding of what's going on. And then what can I do about it? Physical world's a little slower. I can't unfortunately magically transport, inventory across the country. It takes a little longer, but again, they're getting a lot faster there too. And that's just going to continue. But I think e-commerce has been such a powerful catalyst for showing people what's possible.
Absolutely.
And then it's like, okay, how close to that real time decision making can we get in the physical world?
So I know that we were talking about retailers, but also consumer goods. Their supply chains often rely on older legacy systems that maybe don't play nice with other systems. So, are there any practical limitations that you've encountered when trying to deploy or integrate with their inventory systems, ERPs?
Many.
I mean, that's just the nature of
Yeah.
software, but
So there's something that's a little probably surprising when people talk to us. There's,
okay.
broadly speaking, you can bucket a company's data into internal data and external data. So
Okay.
internal generally being what's in your ERP, what's in that inventory management system, all the things that I control. And then the external data being all the other data points that are available from partners or other data sources.
Okay.
Um, we play with both. Okay. So but our genesis was really around the external data. But naturally, once you start to see, well, what's happening across all my different retailers and e-commerce platforms, people want to marry that together with, well, how much inventory do I have? Where's my own inventory? Because, they have more direct control over that. It is much easier for us to connect with external data sources than it is with internal ones.
Well, now that's surprising.
Right. It, seem counterintuitive. You're like, well, the brand already controls this data. Why is that harder? And it's because, well, brands go and buy their ERP and they heavily customize it and they change it and they have their own very specific way of looking at the world. And every single one has their own way. Well, the nice thing is Target has one system that is shared by every single supplier. It has the same data model. It has the same data points. So it only requires a single integration for us, and you can flip a switch, and it doesn't matter if you're selling tires or ice cream. It's the same.
Yeah.
Sure, the SKUs are different and they have different seasonality. There's all the analytics, what you're looking at might be very different, but the data itself is the same. So we can turn on these external parties or partners extremely quickly. It usually takes a little bit of work with IT to make sure that we can marry that nicely with internal data sets when people want to bring that in.
That's surprising, but interesting. And it makes perfect sense. So what kind of internal resources are realistically needed for these types of deployments? Let's say a mid-sized consumer goods company. There's personnel, there's time, there's infrastructure, there's mapping all of those data points.
Right.
What's the typical timeline look like?
Yeah, so usually we're getting some kind of IT resource. We try to keep it as lightweight as possible, and so we have a very specific set of data that we're usually looking for. And for the main ERPs, we've integrated with them many times. We know which tables we want access to, et cetera. So it can be pretty straightforward, but you're right. There's almost always some mapping that needs to be done. And again, funny enough, we can do a lot of this in a very automated way for the external data sets that we get, but we're going to need to bring in all of your master data. Okay, give me your full product master, what are all the hierarchies you use, et cetera. It really depends on how deep you want to go. We have, some customers, they want to connect their entire supply chain. They're like, look, I want to understand manufacturing. I want to see all the logistics. I want to see it from, raw or finished goods rolling off that manufacturing line. And I want to be able to track that all the way to the point of consumption. That's going to be a bigger exercise. There's a lot of mapping to kind of map out what that full supply chain looks like. And those are going to take months. In other cases, people are happier more with, look, I just want to bring in my inventory at my, main warehouses. Let me connect that into my orders and shipments, and then again, connect that into the consumption. And that can happen much more quickly, usually a matter of weeks. So to give you an idea, connecting into the external data sources, usually data is flowing in hours. It's extremely fast for how quickly we can do it. Now, depending on data sizes, and usually we're pulling a couple of years of history, that can take longer. But one of the big areas we focused on is just that time to value, saying, hey, we can be showing you your data the day after you engage with us, and you can kind of get a taste for what's going to become possible. And then you decide how deep you want to go. And often for our customer, you start basic. We're big believers in crawl, walk, run. hey, let's start
Okay.
with your main retailers, right? Let's just do that for now. Let's show you some recommended orders, some of the things that we can do. Once that looks good, well, hey, let's bring in a couple more retailers. Let's start plugging into your ERP and you kind of build out from there rather than signing up for some huge project with, unclear timelines and ROI. It's like, let's build, kind of step by step.
Yeah, and develop a really robust case for this business case before we spend all of the time and effort to map all of that data. So you mentioned ROI. Can you quantify what that return looks like, or even the time frame of getting the ROI for those clients? Um, and what makes a difference in getting a better ROI versus not achieving one?
Yeah. So many points to that question. I will say we're usually shooting for kind of a payback period of 6 to 8 months. That's our goal.
Okay.
Okay.
I
So
mean,
doesn't mean
that's
we
a
always get it, but that's what kind of the target is. And again, we can implement pretty quickly, which helps a lot for that because you're not
mhm,
signing up necessarily for, hey, the next 6 months, we're just in implementation mode.
sure.
Um, that ROI can come from a lot of different things. So there's no, of course, perfect example of this. Some of that is just going to be time saving. I mean, at this point, every company is out there collecting this data, doing reporting on it. And so there is certainly just a time savings, kind of manpower element of, hey, we're going to save you a couple people's time.
Right.
Um, but obviously, that's not usually the exciting part of it. People are more like, okay, how do I sell more? That's the number one question we're going to
Yes.
get. And one of the things that we do is we make recommendations of where retailers aren't ordering enough from you. So, and it's very specific. This is not like, hey, you're undersupplied here. This is, hey, for this retailer, this is exactly how much inventory you should send on this given day to each of their distribution centers. And here is all the justification for why that inventory is needed. Because generally you can't initiate that order yourself. You have to go convince the retailer to say, hey,
Right.
you've
To
under
purchase
ordered
that
by
much.
$1 million. Of course, I'm biased in this. I want to sell more product, but here is the justification for why I think this is going to make sense for both of us. So those are the things, those are the sweet spots. So if you want to talk about, when you have, quickly replenishing items, we can almost always find lots of opportunities where you can make incremental orders. And that's a very, very clear ROI. So that's kind of one of our favorite things to focus on. And it's usually a little bit of a wow moment when people are like, oh my gosh, I found one. We had a customer the other day, or it wasn't the other day now. I guess this is, back to school last year, brand everybody would know. And I mean, they got millions of dollars in
Mhm.
incremental orders during back to school because they could just look through that. Again, it's huge seasonal period for them. They do a massive amount of sales. You miss that window, you're not going to sell that product, right? I mean, this is a window you need to hit. And we could start seeing where the out of stocks were about to start happening, because you could see the sales start to spike. You could see the weeks of supply start to drop. We can give justification. We were able to sell that to some of the largest retailers. And I mean, they got millions of dollars in incremental orders. So those are kind of our favorite, ones to have, but it's always a mix of, I think, very, specific things people can do, some cost savings. And then you get, candidly, you get a bunch of stuff that's probably somewhere in the middle. It's the insights, hey, you're going to better understand your business. How do you quantify that? I'd be lying if I said I knew. But it's clearly valuable. I mean, that's why people pay for a lot of this. And, just having a better pulse of your business is worth something, even if it's hard to put an exact number against it.
I would think that having the knowledge of stockouts in, individual retail locations or individual retailers just in general would be huge information to say, when we send our inventory, when they order it, they sell it and it's it's a quick mover. And if we can get that information faster that, they just ordered and now all of a sudden they're out of stock 3 days later and it's 4 days until their next order, maybe we need to have a discussion about how much they're ordering. So, I mean, that's huge intelligence, especially for, the sales teams. But just also, operationally trying to figure out which channels are driving the revenue for your
Right.
business.
Well, so let's use that example because we can break it up into a couple different pieces and kind of
Okay,
levels of maturity as an organization.
sure.
Because you're absolutely right. I mean, I think hopefully everybody listening could say, understanding where I'm out of stock, there's a clear value to that, right? I'm missing a sale.
Exactly.
That's kind of everybody's worst nightmare. So the first step of that is saying, I have an out of stock. You get some kind of report or alert. You are out of stock of X item, and this is where.
Hmm.
The next question, though, someone may have is, well, I have a lot of out of stocks. I mean, for the average CPG, 5% ish is often the
Hmm.
out of stock rate.
Sure.
Can you quantify those for me? Right? Which out of stocks are bigger problems than others? And so,
Hmm.
we started with out of stocks years ago. And then the next thing we just said is, well, really what we want to do is we want to have a weighted measure that
Yeah.
we call lost sales. How much are you actually losing?
Losing. Hmm.
Because not all out of stocks are equal. I could be out of stock in one store and it's like, I don't really care. I don't do a lot of volume there. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I wish I had zero, but that's not, I don't want 100% service level. I can't have one and it would be incredibly expensive, right? So there's that trade off. So what I want to understand is where are the biggest issues? Where are the
Hmm.
ones where I'm going out of stock where I do a ton of volume,
Hmm.
right?
The
So you
velocity's
start to
higher. You know that it's the revenue stream you want to chase.
exactly, right? 80/20 rule applies in everything in life, it seems like. So that's kind of that next step. And then the next thing people will say is, so what do I do about it? That's great that you told me that I lost $1 million last week at this retailer. Where am I going to lose $1 million next week or 2 weeks from now, depending on what my lead times and all that I can get ahead of? And that's where, when I was talking about those recommended orders, that's actually the
Yeah.
culmination of years of work that started with the very simple question you had and then
Hmm.
worked up to lost sales. And then it would start to be like, well, in aggregate, this is how much they should order to no, we need to be extremely precise so that literally someone can take this data and turn it into an order and say, I need 10,000 units here. I need 20,000 units here. This is when I need them by. And so you can actually act on them. And so that's, but again, we have companies that are still in like stage one. They're like, I'm just excited if I can see out of stocks, and others that every single week, are out there banging on the doors, their sales teams, their, customer supply chain teams talking to those retailers saying, this is where we're going to have issues. Let's get ahead of it now. So,
Hmm. I mean, and that's a win-win for the retailers and the suppliers. I mean,
right.
no one doesn't want to make the sale.
Yes. And out of stock is not good for anyone.
So, speaking of failing or underperforming, what are some examples of customers or a type of client or company where your tool is not a great fit, where
Yeah.
it doesn't work as well? I mean, CPG covers a lot of potential different products. Are there some that do better than others?
Absolutely. I wish I could say that every single, company we talk to were a perfect fit. Um, Generally speaking, we've had quite a bit of success across a lot of different verticals. So there are some verticals where we've probably had more. We've done more in CPG. We've done more in consumer electronics. Health and beauty is a big vertical for us. Historically, we've done probably a little less in apparel, although we've gotten a number of brands on that side too. Like I said, the data, it doesn't matter. The data it's pretty agnostic as to what the type of product is, but the types of problems that companies have and what they're trying to solve does vary. I mean, apparel companies extremely seasonal. They generally have products that they are shipping in for the season, and then it's about how do I sell through that inventory, right? What do those sell through rates look like? What's a markdown schedule? That's very different than selling toothpaste where there's no
Right.
concept of that. we'll call it kind of an evergreen product. The product doesn't really
Yeah.
change very often. It's just in regular replenishment mode. And so, as a result, people will use it very differently.
Hmm.
I think we tend to often do better with replenishment items because, again, a lot of what we're doing is looking for where can you replenish more versus if it's something where you're just selling in for the season.
Hmm.
Um, there's not really opportunities in some cases for replenishment, but
Right.
there's opportunities to optimize in other ways, right? You can change that markdown schedule. You can do other things. Um, the other thing, so I would say it matters, but we've been successful across all of those. The bigger thing that comes down is change management at these companies. And this is going to be true. I'm sure it's true for your business, true of everybody's. How much do they really want to change?
Not at all.
In
Everybody
many
wants
cases, they
change.
don't.
No one wants to do the change.
Yeah. And you have, where does it not work? Well, it doesn't work when you have a buyer who brings you in and then you have the support to make the hard changes.
Hmm.
And, I wish I could say we try to make it, and this is a huge focus for us. How can we make it as easy and simple, again, to get implemented, to do it quickly, to make Alloy as simple as possible? But it still requires somebody on the other side who's like, I want this change. I want more visibility into our data. By the way, we air dirty laundry a little bit.
Yeah. Because,
All
I
of a
mean,
sudden you
it's,
start seeing that channel where you're perpetually have too much inventory.
yeah.
We've had that happen many times. People don't like to see it. You're in a meeting and it's awkward when all of a sudden it's like, wait, why is there twice as much inventory in this channel as this one? What is going on? And, so you need to have an organization where we see it a lot between sales teams and supply chain teams,
Hmm.
right? Sales teams will be, hey, I need this. I need this. Supply chain will be like, do you? And all of a sudden you have Alloy and they have visibility and they can say, I don't think you do need that. You got
Yeah.
plenty of inventory already. So I think that's where, there have been a couple times where I look back and say, yeah, that deal didn't work because for the most part, there wasn't I think the organizational desire for the
Hmm.
change. But the flip side is, of course, you see the companies that do change, and it's so neat. It's so cool to see, and it's not easy. It's never easy. Again, I wish I could tell people it was, but companies that are just like, we're going to reorient, we're going to think on a different time frame, we're going to be that much faster, we're going to use this extra data, and that's really fun to see too.
Yeah, it is really fun to see organizations who want the change, who are excited about, whatever implementation it is. For me at Mebach, we see lots of different implementations of different softwares or new facilities or new production flows, and it's fun when they're engaged and excited about it, and they want to see their company succeed in a new way. And so I totally get that, where you're able to show them something new that they can do with this information that they've had sitting there this whole time, and they just didn't understand what it meant, and now they're able to see it clearly for what it is and adapt and grow and thrive in the marketplace. What would be your favorite customer success story? And you don't have to list a client name if they want to stay anonymous, but like, what's that one time that you made that biggest change or the biggest aha moment and the client was just blown away, super excited? Tell us about that.
I think the first one that comes to mind, and this will be a little general, but it gets to that theme around change management. This was a customer we had in the very early days. They're still a customer. So they've been with us for many years. And so this is when we were very small. We didn't even have a fully formed product at the time. We were still figuring it out. And it was a smaller company. They're actually mostly in apparel. So and I think they were just kind of confused by what we were doing. I think a lot of it was like, okay, this sounds kind of neat. They'd had a lot of success. It had kind of been a company that had just taken off, and mid-sized company. They weren't a huge company, but but they were willing to take a bet on us. And so this is probably why it kind of feels close to my heart, because I was like, hey,
Sure.
they bet on me when we didn't have much. Um, but if you want to talk about a company that changed, and again, it started at the top. It was like their leadership saying, we need to become a data driven organization, and we don't want to be that kind of traditional company. And I've seen it now for years, and I've seen how they today in many ways are more sophisticated than companies that are many, many times their size, just because it's been a part of their DNA. And it's just like not even a question of, is this data that you look at? I mean, they live and they breathe it every single day. And when new employees join, it's just like, this is what you do. This is how you do your job. If you're a salesperson and you don't intimately understand, what is happening, and are super honest. One of the other things, I'm good friends with the CEO, and he'll talk about, it's like, you got to be honest when you're dealing. These are relationships, and saying this
Mm-hmm.
is working, this isn't, even when the things that aren't working aren't to your own personal advantage. That's what really built that trust. So I think, again, that's a very general one. I think there's lots of other examples that have that, like, more concrete, hey, they came in and they immediately were able to, turn it around. They had this problem with overstocks and they were able to figure it out. But this is one that I guess is just kind of close to my heart, because again, I've just seen that over the years, and it's just been so cool to say this is a very different organization than the one that I met, back in the
That's
beginning.
awesome. No, and that's exactly what you set out to do, was to change these organizations and the way that they approach this problem and help them through that. So that's got to be incredibly gratifying. So I would say, for my last question, what do you see next for Alloy? Like, what are you guys working on? What are you trying to do extra?
Yeah. Well, is this going to shock you? It's not going to shock you at all, because it's what everybody's talking about. So if I look at what do we have that's unique, we've got a very unique data set that we collect on behalf of our customers.
Hmm.
We have a very deep understanding of the types of problems that our customers are solving, right? Because we see
Hmm.
it across hundreds and hundreds of different companies. We have a new technology out there with LLMs, okay,
Right?
AI. And, I think, to me, what gets me the most excited is there are so many of these use cases where I say we can really train, an AI to do these.
Hmm.
And I know that seems kind of scary to some people, because they're like, wait a minute, are we just training away our jobs? And the short answer is, in some ways, yes. I mean, all of our jobs are, but we're not going anywhere. We're pretty adaptive. But that to me is fascinating. And as we've started to play with, again, we've also got all the tools, right? We've got all the models and all the analytics. And, instead of training an analyst, you train an AI to be like, well, how do you do this job? What tools can you request? What data do you ask for? And it's fascinating seeing, if you follow kind of the chain of thought of these LLMs as you train them. You can be like, hey, at each step, like, ask for data or ask to use this tool, and then, our platform will give them that response, and they have to kind of digest the information that's provided and decide the next step of what they want to do. It's incredible. I mean, they're and the speed at which they're getting better. I mean, I was just looking this morning. I mean, it's like they get better. Every 3 months they like double in capabilities. It seems like. So I think that to me is going to be a fascinating change. Is how to get to a world that I don't think is that far away, where we're essentially all going to have our own team of analysts, of these agents that are out, operating relatively autonomously. Again, they're not going to be doing everything on their own, but they go out and do things. They come back, report, hey, this is what I found. You give them some direction. They go off and do that again. So that's we as a company are really focused. We don't we try to avoid getting into the marketing AI hype because it's insane. I'm sure you see this.
It is
A marketer.
insane.
Yeah, I mean, we just had our team came back from one of the big supply chain conferences, and they're like, every single company, that's all it was, and then you go talk to companies like, who's using what? I mean, almost everybody's using almost nothing at this point. I think it's a lot of dabbling. So, we're taking maybe the slower approach, but one of saying we want to put something out there that really works and has a clear ROI and all that. But I'd say the things that we're working on right now, you certainly, again, I don't know, are they going to be ready 3 months from now? Is it a year from now? But you can see the promise, and that's pretty darn exciting.
That is exciting. So I think that brings us to the end of our episode. To our listeners, if you found today's episode valuable, be sure to follow Speaking of Supply Chain on wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. And share it with someone else who's shaping the future of operations.